Hey, welcome everybody to the weekly meeting for September 13th, 2018 for nteract. Today on the call is me, Elijah, and Matt.
Hi, Kyle.
Yeah.
The best people.
Only the best.
Nope, John's here.
And John's here now too. Yeah, so I put a little outline in for the meeting notes. So next week is the NumFocus Summit. And I was asked to present our roadmap during the NumFocus forum. I was like, oh, we probably should have a roadmap ready anyways. So, because right now it's kind of scattered across issues and initiatives and other things. And so we started up a roadmap and I've invited people to contribute to it. And then we'll try to coalesce it into where we think the discrete milestones are and what we're aiming for, so that we can be both transparent and hold ourselves accountable, while also enabling others to be able to contribute. I think sometimes people just want to know, like, where should they be involved? I think I'm going to mute John because he's loudly banging. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Anyway, I know at least for me, I ended up doing a whole bunch of cleanup of the Babble setup along with Alex. We eventually got that through, which is great because we can use fragments. We're able to upgrade next. And then incidentally, it made it so that Commuter worked for people that wanted to deploy the current version. And that's about where things went for me last week. And then I ended up collaborating with Paul Ivanoff on what the API should be for our output React elements, and that's about it. So that's what I've got. I know for Matt's had some good contributors that are working on the engines for PaperMail. So
yeah, actually, we've gotten a lot of small contributions. Like we got Azure plugin, and we got a bunch of small like little fixes and additions. Started adding some more languages, so Julia got added. And basically, I think a lot of stuff I could put together an issue that's called the 1.0, and it's kind of all the like major features that collectively we've been talking about is what should be in PaperMail, and I sort of want to target that as the 1.0. And I think that's a good like milestone marker too for the project, and people have been kind of contributing pieces to it. So I can talk more about that if people are curious.
cool. I think that's good. I just added in notes for needing to put together an issue for the 1.0 milestone and going from there. Yeah. And then I know for you, John Detlefs, you've been working on the main site. I'm curious what's left to finish up to get that.
I edited your roadmap to reflect the stuff that I discovered that needed to be done. The styling of the layout component is going to be stressful for me, but I should have that done this weekend. So it's in the pull requests. There's a list of there's style component CSS for the page header, layout, navigation, and then there's just the migrations to the new like files layout. And that, I'm not going to do the web page yet, just because I want to get the changes that we need to get out and then develop iteratively,
Just so everyone knows, web page means the page for /web, which is nteract web, as opposed to desktop.
So nteract on Jupyter, or is that something else?
Right. What was that again?
is the web endpoint like a reflection of the Interact on Jupyter or something else?
Yeah. It's nteract on Jupyter. I mean, unless we had some other server running, that's the main one. I just clarified just in case people hear web page and think like a web page.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I've also been on call, so I've only touched so many things within this stuff. So that's all I've got. I know I'm gonna meet later with Elijah for us to bang out the rest of what we need for the metadata persistence on the Data Explorer. Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you at some point about the kind of like the steps, maybe the longer term target goals on like the APIs on how we want to represent state and like serve it up. I think we've had a few like offline conversations on that topic, but I think getting them written down into like, hey, this is where we want to go would be kind of a cool, fun project.
Is this the tackling the server side state?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think there's also interesting work to be done in just refactoring existing JavaScript plus Flow work to TypeScript. Like Kyle and I were talking about that in like the long term, because Flow's just been kind of painful at points where I think TypeScript would have a better developer experience. Maybe.
Yeah, so I pointed out, so like we've, at least with RxJS and some others, we haven't been able to get the flow always up to date. I'm actually really happy with Flow too, so I'm just kind of disappointed with it. And that, Facebook didn't push it as hard as Microsoft pushed TypeScript to make it a better community tool. Now that we're on Babble 7, it's reasonable for people to iterate a little bit more quickly and with smaller pieces if they want to transition things to TypeScript. But I personally don't want to move things for the sake of moving things, only if something's really blocking stuff. So yeah. But
there's no sense creating more work for ourselves if it's not actually hurting anything.
Yep. So I think that's a good tactical thing for us to, we can look at it, experiment with it. You might as well try out the Babble TypeScript stuff for fun if you want to look at it and see how easy it is to kind of integrate that into the tool chain. But for strategic direction, I think it's important probably that we outline where we want to go, like what we really want. So it's basically where do we want the notebooks to be next year, and talk about where we need them to be, so that we're not just chasing some of the current architectural problems in Jupyter. We say, oh, okay, we're going to do real time in this way. We know from operating notebooks like that we need a server side model of them, that we can't necessarily do it with peering. Like we need to have a centralized server that'll handle it between multiple clients, because the kernel itself is a client, and we want the output stored and the output saved, so that people can go pick up their children after school and not have to wait for a notebook to finish, and just know what the state is. What's that again?
I said you've never done that.
Well, it wasn't me. It was actually we had other users that were like complaining about this, and I'm just like, and sometimes it would be that the VPN would go out. There's just myriad things where we need reliability shifted somewhere else. And we want a really robust system, but we also want, while also exploring great ways for people to interact with these. So
have we got a section on the roadmap? I think we it's kind of hard to quantify, but I think it is necessary, because as a gap to sort of feeling like it's all the way ready is sort of the hardening of the Interact components, maybe after the React API upgrade, because there's definitely a lot of like little bugs or little usability issues that really like limit the ability for people to adopt, I think, the like whole interface right now.
Yeah, like Control F would be really nice in Interact, the desktop app.
Oh yeah, hotkeys. A lot of people complain about hotkeys at JupyterCon that I talked to. They'd used it a little bit.
Yeah, well, Kyle has opinions about hotkeys.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right?
But I mean, maybe we should just have like something where like the common usability issues or like, or things we just know we need to go fix and like make sure that like we can get a lion's share of the sort of usability issues might be a good like topic to talk about. I think it also gives people visibility into the state of like how hardened the components are.
Yeah. I won't speak. So I like having hotkeys. The thing that I usually end up talking about is not having command mode, because I've had to help so many people with getting out from the confusion that is accidentally changing their document by touching keys on the keyboard when they thought they were actually focused in a cell.
Hey, I found the non-Vim user.
There's tons of those, and we want to keep supporting other analysts. Yeah, that's true too. Like, I'm a Vim user, so it's like I understand command mode. So it's very, I don't know if I'd call it humbling, but I'm like, I know this isn't going to win everyone, and it's confusing as heck, especially when there's no good visual indication for what's happening in a way that a user will instantly understand that if they type DD, they're deleting a they're like deleting a cell, or if they, accidentally they're starting to type D something else or I. They can like change the cell types with random keys, and it just feels scary, which is different than saying, hey, these are the hotkeys that we support, right? And where they're normal meta keys. So anyway, I think we should definitely go after hotkeys, and then hardening the nteract components. I think we need to figure out which, like, prioritize those and just start working towards them, even if in just a slow fashion. Just get them piece by piece.
You want me to add a little section under what should we do? Technical down here?
Oh, is this in the roadmap one or the meeting?
No, I was thinking it'd be a good thing to capture in the roadmap of something that it's a, yeah. I'll put it down here.
No, that's good. I actually took notes on what you're saying, but I put it in the meeting notes. But it makes sense to just put it in the roadmap.
Transfer them.
Yeah. Either way. When you said hardening too, I thought it was going to be like we iframe all HTML outputs.
Yeah, we need some marquees in there too.
We could do that too. I mean, there does need to be hardening in the security sense too.
Yeah.
That I haven't wanted to get the ire of people yet for, because once we start hardening it, it's going to disable certain things.
Yeah. That was definitely like a lot of the stuff. Like I didn't mention it or quash anything in JupyterCon, but there was definitely like a lot of people trying to do things that were very clearly not going to fly if their security team ever like got wind of it.
Yeah.
I was actually even thinking about that. I was reading the PaperMail source code, and I realized that we copy all the environment variables into the notebook, which is kind of convenient when you rely on environment variables. But we don't actually expand those when we rerun the notebook or something like that. And two, a lot of old systems store passwords in their environment variables.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that when I was reading. I was like, it might not be a great idea for us to be copying all the environment variables in. But I didn't.
Wait, what's copying in environment variables?
PaperMail stashes them into the metadata.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. We don't make use of it, and since no one's really noticed it, I was thinking about silently just deleting it.
I mean, you could target that for 1.0 then. I met with somebody that uses PaperMill's records.
Yeah.
And they're actually using them in like a pipeline as real outputs. And I was like, oh, there's a user that's using these, and they've been using them for like a year.
Yeah.
I invited them to do a blog post. Before you inevitably rip it out.
Well, I think we'll have someone that's forward compatible. So we'll make sure we don't like mess people up, because it is like a nice pattern. It's just not the only way you would want to represent saving data, I think. And it's a little, yeah, I've definitely leaned more on the, if people aren't familiar with the record pattern in PaperMail, PaperMail both lets you execute a notebook, and it has this little side thing you can do, which is inside a notebook, you can record some data in the metadata while you're executing. And it's kind of convenient, but it doesn't really fit with the, like, I'm executing a notebook pattern. It seems like, a secondary attribute. And so the record, the other thing too, is it's built for like a very specific way you would do things, like a map reduce type pattern, where you would record all of your notebooks. Like you would do let's say a grid search for your best alpha parameter for your machine learning, and you would like run 100 notebooks, and then you want to collect the results. So the collector always assumes you have many notebooks with values. It always builds a data frame of all your notebook outputs, which isn't always what you want to do. Sometimes you just want to record some junk and then read it later. And so I was talking a lot with Tim on the topic, and I think Tim had some good ideas in there. So we tried to capture them in an issue and start hashing it out. I think I'm leaning towards the make a scrapbook repo next to PaperMail, which PaperMail can, we'll keep the record functionality for a few versions or something like that and let people know it's deprecated. But I think that's what we're going to go for 1.0.
Cool. I like the idea. And then anybody that needs to, they can transition off. They can read the deprecation message that says, oh, you need to install Scrapbook, and then here's how you use it.
Exactly. And then we'll see, like, to do exactly what you're doing, record, do this in Scrapbook, and everything will work.
And then the R bindings can be called Scrapper, if that's not already available.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't found anyone who is using those R bindings, and I haven't touched that stuff in a while. But yeah, part of the Scrapbook would be, it would move to, like, all the only bindings we have outside of Python are for the record functionality, so they would move with it.
Yeah. It was, the user I talked to was also an R user. They ended up using the Python one because they couldn't tell if the R one was well supported, which I don't know if that's because we used dev tools to install it, because you can like install straight from GitHub for an R package, right? It's not on CRAN. Doing it on CRAN takes a whole bunch of extra work.
Well, I think the answer is it's not that well supported. I
guess that's it.
Here.
So
that's good to know, though.
Yeah.
What other people have thoughts on road mapping and sort of things they think they'd like to see in the medium term?
This might be a silly idea, but I'd really like to have like a breakpoint cell type. Just put it in the metadata that we're going to render it as a breakpoint cell. And then when we're processing a set of cells that we're executing, we have like a run until breakpoint command that looks for those cells and then stops execution at that breakpoint cell. It's a common thing I've ran into at work. Maybe I'm doing notebooks wrong.
John, describe how you'd use it?
I have an async. I have a set of functions that are all processing data, and then up to some nth cell, I need to wait on that data to collect, and it's just an async action. It's going to take some time, and then I would have a bunch of cells following it that rely on that data being collected to render some visualizations. And it's a two-step process, unfortunately, because there's no like top level await in Python or Node that lets you just stop executing and wait for something to finish.
So it's like is it like a promise.all cell?
No, it's just a run until this point cell, because unfortunately, if you started interacting with the language, you'd have to interact with the kernel, and I don't want to do that.
So I guess what I'm curious about, so based on this and based on your requirements, it is tempting to teach you the Python and Node you would need to like finish those. Are you working in Node or Python for this?
Right now I'm working in Node.
Okay. Yeah, because then which I think is more like a limitation of the JavaScript kernel. And Grant and I actually looked at this where we could do top level await for a JavaScript kernel.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and I think we could probably get, like, I think it would be even better for the roadmap to, like, I think it's okay if you're tackling JavaScript itself and working on that kernel.
Yeah. Is there any way we can get the Slack upgraded so that we can see the old messages that were there? Because they got lost. I feel like there were some
Nope.
useful. No? Okay.
Not going to pay for that. For the number of users that we have, it's not going to happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I recommend making issues.
One thing the other thing that might be there is, was this a simpler ask in the sense of like where you're selecting on a cell and you say run to this cell rather than a kernel level thing?
That's what I'm saying.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So is that not, is it just because is it the JavaScript, like, because that doesn't sound like a kernel problem. It sounds like what the front end is sending.
Well, to me, I like, if I want a notebook, so like, I imagine if we implemented this, like the stages at which we're going to implement this is that we're going to set metadata on that cell, which, I mean, that's the only way you can go for these, right? You set metadata on the cell, it says that it's basically the breakpoint cell where it's going to stop and it won't do a run all.
Well,
and in the case of, like, let's say that it runs through PaperMail or MB convert, most of the time they're just going to have to ignore that.
Oh, I was even thinking
there's no way to continue on from it.
Sorry, I was thinking something even simpler is like, it's just literally like you're just keeping track state-wise. Like you don't have to necessarily store any state, right? You're just in its for UI feature, right? Where you're saying, oh, run these first 5 because like run 1 through 5 cell in my front end state. And then because I'm like on cell 5 and I'm saying run through to this, I just don't run after that.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I think that.
Oh no, so I was saying like we could do that. What I was saying is that the notebook format, like we're doing something a little bit strange on the format if we do that. Maybe it's okay, like only UI wise, but it does mean that your notebooks don't translate well to other environments. Like if it's public, if you're sharing this notebook with someone else, they load it up in Classic or whatever.
Oh, I see.
They have to, I mean, all of those other front end, like they do have to implement this breakpoint, but it also means that it doesn't really run linearly. It's linearly, then it stops, right?
You could just have it only run in, like you'd have a command that says run including breakpoints. Right?
I don't know if you need an explicit breakpoint in the API data, right? Because it's the same as if I human interactively did control enter on the first 5 cells, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you could even like, it could even just be something where you're mocking doing those first 5 and it doesn't have to be like a metadata on the notebook. But anyway, it's interesting.
It seems like the problem is that if we did it, it would require, it would be breaking from the general notebook format that's observed in Jupyter and Jupyter Lab, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a problem just because the more we do that, the less likely we're going to have cross-platform compatibility.
So the way that, I mean, like so this is something where like a user can use the feature, and then like, so here's how I'm imagining it's going to go for a user. We're going to accidentally, so in notebook users that like Matt and I are supporting, they're going to enable this, forget it, and then they're going to run it as a job, and PaperMail is just going to run through it, ignoring that breakpoint. And so, which is how you should treat the notebook anyways. Like it should still be able to run through, which means that the language semantics should really dictate if you're gonna, break. If you're gonna wait for things, then
there should be a change in the kernel spec, right? Or not the kernel spec, but the messaging specification. there has to be some sort of post.
I think what's annoying about this is that because of the way in which you're coding it, there's an inherent halting problem where you can't, since you manually are saying, oh, I know when this is done, now I can run the rest of the cells.
Yeah.
You're not like, all the work really needs to happen in your code. Otherwise, there's this manual step. And if we're trying to run something in automation that would require a manual step of knowing when to run it, like, oh, you wait for 5 seconds or so. Once I see a certain kind of output, then I know to continue.
Yeah.
Like,
but it's kind of prohibitively difficult to actually affect change in the Jupyter messaging specification, right? Because what we're asking for here is like some sort of async message. That's like async.
So all the messages are async in Jupyter.
Yeah. It's more about well, I think this is the same problem a lot of the widget conversations actually got into with at JupyterCon that people are talking about. They wanted to have human interacting widgets that wait for a front end action to take place before they do other things. But you have to build it in such a way that it means that notebook inherently becomes a human only notebook at some point. So we would want to be careful about adding too many things that make human only notebooks. But I do think there's something in there that we could play around with the front, like the look and feel of what you're doing in the UI that would be less intrusive. Maybe if we like sat in front of a screen of it at some point and just like played with what the user's trying to do as opposed to trying to define the feature that meets what the user's doing.
But John, if iJavaScript had await, top level await, where you could say await promise.all, this collection of promises, would that solve your use case?
That if you do that, the next cell isn't going to start executing until the promise is resolved, right?
Correct. So it is up to you in JavaScript to manage your async flows.
Yeah, and I have written async functions which are useful, but sometimes it's still just like there needs to be a global variable that you're populating data for. And until you do that, I mean, I guess you could just also write your JavaScript to rely, like you have to tie your async code to the actual rendering of the data. It can't be decoupled. So yeah, I'm probably just doing it wrong, but I think it is true that other people are doing it wrong as well.
No, I think this just shows kind of some of the limitations of like the JavaScript kernel in particular. Like, because I'll say it like this. I think it could be as good as Observable HQ is doing it if people were investing in the node kernel itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah,
and it's not an easy ask to get that to change in meaningful ways because it's a big project in terms of it's kind of complicated to improve it, I think.
If I had the time, I know that I could handle it. Me and Grant would totally go for it. We wrote this thing called Notebook not too long ago, and we made that do top level async await. And it does the Electron app thing, but it embeds. So this like broke away from Jupyter for fun. Instead of using the iJavaScript kernel, it used VM from Node, right? So you could run in context, and then we make sure to transpile stuff. So the way that you do the async await is this like whenever you get all code is effectively wrapped in an IFI that is an async function, and you always assume that you have a promise for like the code that goes in. So like the code that you're sending in, you may just like write 4 lines or whatever. If all of that code gets wrapped in this is exactly what Chrome does. So if you play in the Chrome console, it has top level await, and it does top level await through this, which is that it wraps it inside an async function, immediately executes it, and then waits to resolve that promise. And you don't see it's like the promise of your execution. And so iJavaScript needs to lean towards that too. But the main developer on it, you know, it's a for fun project. Yeah.
That does bring up the topic of if there's any, you know, when we start walking through maybe the API and backend changes, if there's anything on the API layer, I think being really careful, like, and bringing up when this is going to not be usable in other frameworks, other notebook frameworks. But there's a few spots where it's going to be really hard to achieve stuff without having extensions to the kernel API, or the, at least in some capacity, like a middle layer potentially. But yeah, I would like to talk about that more, and we have like a very careful conversation about try and iterate through how we can have backwards compatibility, but maybe get some of these abilities unlocked that are kind of blocking forward development.
I would like to work in the JavaScript kernel. I just don't know if I can commit to it, just because I've known that I've overcommitted to things in the past and not delivered on it.
So I think for now then, we finished the website. I'll happily work on the JavaScript kernel if I set aside time for it later. And I think to help me out, if we provide the JavaScript kernel at Netflix, like in a way that like UI engineers can use our data platform, and they're like able to build on top of Node, all of a sudden we'll need these things so that they can do the same kind of like data analysis layer stuff.
If you could just do this, sorry I cut you off. If you could just do the same thing you did for the website when we get to it, and just write like a list of things that I need to get done, that's extremely useful, because I just don't even know where to start.
For the JavaScript kernel?
Yeah, actually, I think this is like good circle back and maybe a place to wrap up too, is that like these are like good things to put into like what are niceties that we want to be able to enable and be able to categorize, is this part of interact work or is this outside of interact, and like what are the steps needed to do it. I think these are good things to collect. So I tried capturing some of the stuff. I'm a little behind on the doc, so maybe we should update the doc. And does that sound reasonable?
Yep. I was just taking notes of some of the last few things here. So
yeah, because I missed those.
Cool. So you all have access to the roadmap. So the general format in our 4 minutes, I'm just gonna share screen. Let's make this bigger. Everybody see this? Extremely wide screen. So what I want to aim for is that, so like for a top level item, so I wrote this one as an example, even though we totally want to do this. This is also on the Spark roadmap, which is cancelable execution, right? So list yourself as an owner. That is, you know, you're holding yourself accountable to get this work done, as well as when you're expecting to get it done, so that we can actually track how the work is going. Projects that it relates to, a description, any of the risks in going after this like feature set, or even epic, or even, you know, if it's like a bigger story, and then the deliverables themselves to finish out this milestone. So this is how I'm hoping that we'll be able to put these together to make it real clear. I only added this in recently after some folks have already started adding in some different sections. So I want to make it so that people know where they can go for stuff and who to reach out to like go after an area. So this is it. I can now add more people because now Matt's added. There we go. Luckily in alphabetical order to add seal at the end. Okay, that's it. How convenient that you're at the end of the alphabet. Oh, you're muted, I guess. Or it's just not working. I guess you're unmuted now, Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I muted so I didn't have an echo. Yeah. Yep. I repeat what you said.
Oh, okay. Cool. Since we're out of time for the meeting, we'll call this. And thanks everybody for coming. And I'll see you all next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.